Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very, very interesting. And of course, this video is going to be by our good friend Dante's Boxing Nation. The reason why I decided to review this video is because I think it's going to cover a certain amount of narratives that especially channels like Dante that they try to put out there that in my opinion are usually very false. Or it shows overall the way that they may rank one fighter, like a Canelo Alvarez, who's viewed as a Latino or possibly even a Caucasian Hispanic fighter, and of course, compared to a fighter of Gervonta Tank Davis. When it comes down to now, Gervonta Tank Davis, apparently what he said the other day after Canelo Alvarez's victory over Caleb Plant was that he believed that he was basically the Canelo of the 135-pound division, which I think more than likely what he meant overall was that in terms of talent, he's on that level. Now, can I necessarily say that Gervonta Tank Davis, in terms of talent, is on the same level as Canelo Alvarez? Maybe, perhaps not yet, because I need to see him in bigger challenges. I need to see him in bigger tests, and I've pretty much seen Canelo face repeated A-class fighter after repeated A-class fighter. But when it comes down to it, all in all, I think I do believe what he was, getting at, or I think overall I know what he was getting at. But Dante, he's gonna bitch, and he's gonna go on this huge pro-black cult rant when it comes down to it, all in all. Because we all know Dante, he loves to play the victim card when it comes down to it and bitch and moan about how much racism there is against certain black athletes when it comes down to it. And I do agree there is a certain amount of racism or double standards against black athletes. But Dante doesn't really help out any double standards. He doesn't really help out anything because Dante, all he is another big racist on one of these channels or another big person that all in all is someone who is very racially motivated or someone overall who thinks with their feelings first. He's not logical. He's not objective. So all in all, Dante really is not going to help anyone out with anything. So it is what it is. Anyways, when it comes down to it, there was a certain amount of people all in all that ended up criticizing Gervonta Tank Davis because he compared himself to Canelo Alvarez. And Dante, if he were logical and objective, or if he kept the same energy, he really shouldn't have a problem with that because he gets after Canelo Alvarez all the time for comparing himself to Floyd Mayweather Jr. Well, if Gervonta Tank Davis, if he is comparing himself to a Canelo Alvarez, you also should have a problem with that, Dante, if you're not a person who's racially motivated and a person that is logical and objective, because Gervonta Tank Davis has done absolutely nothing compared to what Canelo Alvarez has done. Nothing at all. So we'll see what Dante has to say. This is going to be a very long video. Could even be over an hour. So we'll see all in all what he has to say. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Boy, oh boy, we got a lot to talk about in this video. A whole lot to talk about. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and issue a disclaimer in this video, just so we can go ahead and get the unwanted people out of the room right now. For those of you guys who say that you don't like to hear about racism being exposed, this is your opportunity to stop the video right now, unsubscribe, please don't come back. Please, because we don't want you here. You're not invited. Okay? My message has never been for you racists. It's for the people that are against racism.
My message has never been for you racists, only for the people with the pro-black cult mentality. Once again, Dante always makes me laugh. He's like literally one of the most unself-aware dudes that I've personally seen out there. I'm not sure if he truly believes overall that he doesn't realize how much of a gigantic racist he is, or how racially discriminatory he is, or when it comes down to it, I'm not sure if he's just that stupid, or all in all, if he realizes what he's doing and he's just doing it to get views. Maybe a little bit of both. Who knows?
Now, with that out the way, let's get into it. So, with black people being the most magnanimous people in the world, it shouldn't surprise you that black boxers will go out of their way to extend their hand and praise Canelo Alvarez.
Really? So why are certain boxers like Terrence Crawford and Andre Ward possibly criticizing Canelo Alvarez? Please.
And I'm going to get deeper into this and
Now, don't get me wrong, there probably are a certain amount of black boxers that are praising Canelo Alvarez, but you know why that is because there's an old saying, real recognizes real. And when you take a look at Canelo Alvarez, you can tell that Canelo Alvarez is a real deal fighter. Canelo Alvarez is the best of this generation, at least so far the 2020s, heading into also the final parts of the 2010s. Canelo Alvarez is the best of that era. It is what it is.
explain why they do this. But before I do, let's talk about what Gervonta Tank Davis said in response to Canelo Alvarez's knockout win over Caleb Plant to become undisputed at 168. So Gervonta Tank Davis, he said that Canelo Alvarez is me at 168. And surprisingly, Gervonta Tank Davis, he received an enormous amount of backlash from race fans. You would have thought that they would have said, you know what? Since this guy is praising our guy Canelo, we're going to give him a pass and we're going to exclude him from the rest of.
Well, is that really praising Canelo? I mean, I guess in a way you can say that it is. But is that really praising Canelo? Or is that really Gervonta Tank Davis' way of kind of trying to brag about himself? It is what it is. And, you know, you have no problem basically saying that Canelo Alvarez is not on the same level as a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Does that mean that you're a racist, Dante, just because you think that? Now, we already know that you are a gigantic racist, but when it comes down to it, all in all, you know, when it comes down to it, I would not necessarily get angry at someone for saying that Canelo Alvarez is not on the Floyd Mayweather Jr. level. I would tend to agree. But when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, you know, you get super duper pissed when Canelo Alvarez or some other people compare him to Floyd Mayweather Jr., but then people get angry at Gervonta Tank Davis for comparing himself to that of a Canelo Alvarez who's accomplished way, way, way more in his career, and all of a sudden it's a race issue. And I'm not saying that maybe certain people that, you know, it may not be a race issue with certain people, but when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, I understand why a certain amount of people had the response that they did.
The black people that we don't like. You would have thought they would have did something like that, but it was the contrary. Instead, they completely trashed Gervonta Tank Davis, berating him by saying that he hasn't fought anybody. He's fought bums. And keep in mind, guys, the majority of fans saying these things are Mexican fans.
And let's be real, Gervonta Tank Davis, besides facing Leo Santa Cruz, who really has he fought? There's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis, but, you know, for the people overall, Dante, he may try to spread this narrative of saying, oh, well, I can't believe these guys are saying that he's facing nobody but bums and all that bullshit. And he may try to even go as far to say, well, you know, they have no right to say that Canelo Alvarez is facing the best. Actually, yes, they do. Because Canelo Alvarez has been facing the best. He's been facing the best for years upon years upon years. Now, does that mean that I think every single fight that he has is an A-grade fight? No. But Canelo Alvarez, at the end of the day, when you take a look at the amount of champions and the amount of people that he's beaten, there is no doubt about it. Usually he's facing A-class fighters. When you take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis, who really is he facing? I mean, Mario Barrios, he's not an A-class fighter. You know, even this next dude that he's facing, decent fighter, but is he really an A-grade fighter? No.
Canelo fans, right? Now, it's rumored that Canelo Alvarez actually responded to Gervonta by saying, yeah, but you got to fight better competition. Like pretty much saying the same thing that you hear the fans say. But I say it's a rumor because I looked everywhere and I didn't see anywhere where Canelo said this. But it was a couple of Mexican Canelo fans in my comment section that was telling me, why are you not talking about this? And I'm like, man, you must not know about me. I couldn't wait to go in on this because this gives me an opportunity to lay everything out as clear as day, to present all of the exhibits, which are all facts. But you better get your
alleged facts. Dante always makes me laugh. Once again, he's like that one dude overall that really truly does not know overall how stupid he looks. Dante is one of the most unself-aware dudes and one of the most deluded dudes that I've personally ever seen.
Tissue out, Canelo fans, because you're going to be crying your ass off because that truth is painful. Man, it burns. Them Canelo fans, they'll tell you how much it hurts. With that being said, let's go ahead and break down the dichotomy. So once again, this man Gervonta, he gets trash for praising Canelo Alvarez and basically comparing himself to Canelo Alvarez. But he didn't say he was greater than, he just said that guy is like me at 168. Okay, he receives all the backlash.
Right, so then when Canelo Alvarez fans, when it comes down to it all in all, when they basically say, oh, well, Canelo's doing the same thing that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is doing, then why do you get your panties all up in a twist, Dante? You get your panties all up in a twist because you don't believe that it's the truth. What I'll say is this, Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he's facing some all-time great fighters, or he's facing repeated great fighters. Would I say that he's on the same level as a Floyd Mayweather Jr.? No, I would not. So that's understandable. But Dante, he's basically trying to make this case that people are responding and it's a racist thing. I'm not saying that, certain people, of course, don't have a racial agenda against black fighters. Of course, there are certain people that do. But I understand why a certain amount of people responded the way that they did. Because I'm sorry, but Gervonta Tank Davis, he just hasn't done anything near to Canelo Alvarez. It is what it is.
They all jump on him saying he hasn't fought anyone. Now, remember when I told you guys the majority of fans that are saying this are Mexican fans. It's funny because especially if you grew up on the West Coast, anywhere on the West Coast, you've heard many people probably say, you've heard Mexicans probably say once or twice, boxing is a Mexican sport. We run this sport, right? Saying that they're the most dominant in the sport. So just think about this for a second. Let me ask you the question. Who does Gervonta Tank...
Now, this is Dante's best argument all in all because he's really an idiot when it comes down to it, and he does not know how to compose arguments very, very well. Or he thinks that these are intelligent arguments. Let's see all in all what he has to say.
Davis exclusively fight. He's fighting nothing but Mexican and Latino fighters, right? I mean, hell, Gervonta Tank Davis is on a Mexican food diet right now. So to my Mexican fans, when you say he needs to fight someone, when you say he needs to fight fighters on his level or on a higher level, are you saying that Mexican fighters are inferior to black fighters?
Now, listen to what Dante just said. Basically, because Gervonta Tank Davis is facing repeated Latino fighters or Mexican fighters, basically what he's saying is that, well, since you guys are saying that he's facing nobodies and he's facing repeated Mexican fighters, you're pretty much admitting that black fighters are the most dominant fighters in the world, which sometimes they very well tend to be, especially in boxing. Latino fighters and black fighters, they're usually the ones, American black fighters especially, they're usually the ones that are most dominant in the sport of boxing, at least usually. And of course you have some Asians here and there, and Caucasians, decently here and there, but it's mainly American black fighters and also Latino fighters when it comes down to it. But what Dante isn't mentioning is that Gervonta Tank Davis, he's not facing any A-class Latino fighters besides Leo Santa Cruz. I give him credit for beating Leo Santa Cruz, but besides Leo Santa Cruz, who really have you beat? Let's be real. Is Mario Barrios someone that is an A-grade fighter? No one thinks that Mario Barrios is an elite fighter. No one. This next dude that he's facing, that's great, but this dude already not only has a loss in his career, but, who really has he beat? You know what I'm saying? It's not like Gervonta Tank Davis is calling out Jose Ramirez and Oscar Valdez and Miguel Berchelt and, all these other guys. Like, he's not calling out the elite, Latino or the elite Mexican fighters. It'd be different if he was facing Teofimo Lopez and, Leo Santa Cruz repeatedly and all this other stuff. You know what I'm saying? But he's not. He's facing guys that really aren't even legitimate champions.
Because we already know that if there was a Mexican fighter that was fighting nothing but the best black fighters in his division, he didn't want to fight any white fighters. He didn't want to fight any Mexican fighters. He only wanted to go after the best black fighters in that division. Would anybody ever call him a cherry picker? Would anyone ever say, man, you need to step up in competition? They would never say that.
Dante, that's the problem. And, I get your point to a degree, but the problem is you don't really have a point because You're so deluded with that point. Gervonta Tank Davis is not facing anyone who is A grade. This dude is trying to make the point that Gervonta Tank Davis is facing A grade Latino fighters. Once again, I give you credit for the Leo Santa Cruz win. That was an A grade win if you want to debate that. Every other win that Gervonta Tank Davis has on his resume is either a B or a C class win. Mario Barrios is not an A class win. Not even close. He's not an A grade fighter.
Right? But they say it when a black fighter is fighting nothing but Mexican fighters. I bet you guys didn't even think.
I mean, that'd be like if Canelo Alvarez, all in all, like if he fought like a J-Rock Williams next, or a Jarrett Hurd, or someone like that, and I said, you know what are you guys complaining about? Canelo Alvarez, he's fighting the best black fighters in the world. Like, of course those guys are decent black fighters, but they're not the creme de la creme, and you can tell that because they've struggled a lot in their bigger fights, and some of these guys already have a couple of losses. Like, you know what I'm saying?
About it that way, did you? Because you were so quick to try to discredit Gervonta.
No one would think like that, Dante, who has a logical mindset, because it doesn't make any sense. Because Gervonta Tank Davis isn't facing A-grade fighters.
Say, you didn't even think about what you guys were saying. Listen, man, it is a fact that 95% of all of the greatest fighters of all time, I'm talking about from black to white to Mexican and everything else, at least 95% of the greatest fighters of all time, they have suffered their first loss to a black fighter. That is a fact. And when it comes to the Mexican fighters, at least...
I would have to think about that. I'm not doubting that, or I'm not going to go as far to say 95%, but a certain amount of them have that. There's certain fighters, all in all, that did lose to other fighters, though, like a Joe Louis. Now, of course, his first loss was... Actually, no, his first loss was against a Caucasian fighter, Max Smelling. And then his second loss, I believe, was against Jersey Joe Walcott, I believe. I'm trying to think, all in all. Who else? I don't know. But if we just talk about Mexican fighters, Marco Antonio Barrera, he had a couple of losses before he beat Prince Nassim Ahmed and before he lost to Manny Pacquiao. But I don't remember the fighters specifically that he lost to. Eric Morales, his first loss, I believe, was to Marco Antonio Barrera. And when we talk about, I believe, Julio Cesar Chavez, I don't remember his first loss. I can't remember. Canelo, of course, lost to Floyd Mayweather. Marquez, he lost his first fight pretty early on in his career. But his first major loss, I think actually was against Pacquiao. So I would have to look that up a little bit.
98% of the greatest Mexican fighters suffered their very first loss to a black fighter. If you don't believe me, go look up your favorite Mexican fighter and look at who he lost to. He either suffered his first loss to a black fighter, or one of his most significant losses was to a black fighter. And the same thing goes for all of the greatest black fighters. The majority of the black fighters suffered their first loss to another black fighter.
That's not completely untrue. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing to say. But, Dante, he's trying to make this point overall that people just intuitively know that black fighters are usually the best on the planet. And I think that he has a certain point to a degree. But when it comes down to it, all in all, the point that Dante's trying to make his point just because Gervonta Tank Davis, Gervonta, he's facing these elite Mexican fighters, and they're saying overall that he's facing nobody. The problem is that he's not facing elite Mexican fighters. Once again, that would be like if Canelo Alvarez, if he fought Julian J-Rock Williams and Jarrett Hurd next, and, because those guys, they're not A-grade fighters, but they're probably B-grade fighters when it comes down to it. And, that's like me saying, Dante, he's just not happy with who Canelo is facing. Is that him basically saying that, Caucasian fighters and Latino fighters are above black fighters? Like, that's just stupid.
So once again, imagine if there was a boxer, a Mexican boxer, who was on a straight soul food diet. You dig? He wanted nothing but the best black fighters available.
Right, but does Gervonta Tank Davis really want nothing but the best of the best out there? If anything, actually, it's been quite the opposite. And it's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis. I think that he's very talented, but let's be real. Every time Vasyl Lomachenko, even to this day, every time Vasyl Lomachenko is brought up, the man has a damn near heart attack from panicking so much. I've never once heard him call out Teofimo Lopez or Devin Haney or Jose Ramirez. He called out Josh Taylor that one time, but ever since Josh Taylor unified the division, he's been deathly quiet. So, I mean, what are we really talking about here? Is Gervonta Tank Davis really going on this straight diet of A-grade fighters? It'd be different if he was facing even a Jose Ramirez or someone all in all who's like a Teofimo Lopez. Ryan Garcia, in my opinion, isn't an A-grade fighter. Let's be real. Like, his next fight was going to be against Rolly Romero. Is Rolly Romero ever going to be a fighter that is looked at as an A-grade fighter? Like, come on.
He was beating them all, knocking them all out. Canelo fans, be real with yourself. Be honest in your heart right now. If that were the case, imagine a Mexican fighter doing that right now. And I was making videos saying, man,
that's like me saying, oh, well, you know what? Virgil Ortiz, he's going after every elite black fighter because, he fought Maurice Hooker and I believe a couple of other decent black fighters. So Virgil Ortiz, all in all, he's on this straight soul food diet. Like, it is what it is. But Maurice Hooker, he's not an A-grade fighter.
Canelo Alvarez, he needs to stop cherry picking. He needs to step up in competition.
Dante, that's what you've been saying for like the past several years. Because you've never liked Canelo that much. Because you don't want him as your number one pound for pound. Because you have a big racial issue and you have a bunch of racial bias. It is what it is. Dante is so unaware.
Because all he's fighting against is undefeated Mexican guy.
Or perhaps, like I said, maybe he's a little bit more aware than what we think, and maybe he's doing a lot of this for money. Who knows? Could be a little bit of both.
Moving up to higher weight classes, knocking out bigger, undefeated black champions. What would you guys be saying? Oh, you're the biggest hater. You're the biggest hater on Canelo. Right? This
Nice Mexican accent there, Dante.
This is what they would be saying. But speaking of them loving to use that word hater, do you guys notice none of these fans, and I'm talking about even outside of the Mexican fans, none of these fans have ever said, stop hating on Crawford. Stop hating on Gervonta Tank Davis. Stop hating.
Okay, Dante, I don't necessarily have a problem with that point, but let's be real. Are you a person, as a black person, when it comes down to it, are you on the rooftops, are you on the mountaintops screaming, oh, well, let's not hate on Vasyl Lomachenko. Let's stop calling Gennady Golovkin a hype job because we have to take a look at things more logically and objectively. Let's stop criticizing, overall Tyson Fury because we're acting like a bunch of idiots. Are you ever, a part of that narrative? Or basically, are you a part of that barbecue? It is what it is. Let's be real. Like I said, Dante, he always makes me laugh because he always tries to basically say, "Oh, you racists out there." Dante, you're a part of that same train. You're just a different demographic. That's all you are.
War on Floyd Mayweather, on Jaron Ennis. Stop hating on Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, and the list goes on and on and on. You guys notice that? In fact, when it comes to a black fighter, they damn near are calling you N-word lovers if you're a fan of your own countrymen, right? You can't even be a fan of the man.
Dante, all in all, he always tries to spread this narrative that, oh, well, I root for my country. You don't root for your country, Dante. It's just a lot of black, fighters. They're usually the most dominant when they're American black fighters. Sometimes you'll get some British black fighters that are very dominant. You'll get some African fighters here and there, but they're not usually overly great when it comes down to it. So Dante, he loves to hide behind this bullshit. Oh, I root for my country. You don't root for your country, Dante. I'm not saying that you don't partially root for your country, but we all know who you root for. Like I said, you're a big leader of the pro-black cult.
It comes from your own country. Because
that's why he rooted for Guillermo Rigondeaux over Nonito Donaire or Araceli Lara over some of these other fighters like a Canelo Alvarez. It is what it is. And if that's your favorite fighter, cool. But don't sit here and basically say like, oh, well, I root for my country. Bullshit. No, you don't. All right, you root for, your own demographic, which is cool. It is what it is. I don't have any problem with that. But then don't get after other people because they support their own demographic more than others. It is what it is.
They are so racist. What do they say? Oh, you just like Floyd Mayweather. Oh, you just like Terrence Crawford. Stop riding Terrence Crawford. Stop.
Well, let's be real here for a second, Dante. You always tended to like Deontay Wilder or even other black fighters that maybe were not even, American. You always tended to like them a little bit more than some of the other Caucasian or Latino fighters out there. Let's be real.
Riding Floyd Mayweather, right? Now all of a sudden, liking.
I mean, you expect me to believe that you give Caleb Plant and Jamal Charlo the same treatment because Caleb Plant is also American, just like Jamal Charlo? I hate to tell you this, Dante, I'm not believing that.
Someone is a bad thing. But when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, if you don't.
And I don't necessarily have a problem with you supporting whatever fighters that you want. But Dante always bitches and moans and basically says, like, oh, well, these Caucasian fans are so racist, or these Latino fans are so racist because they're cheering for Canelo over their own countrymen, all sorts of bullshit. Why the hell would they not be allowed to cheer for their own, race? Why the hell would they not be allowed to cheer for their own demographic? Dante apparently says that it's so racist for Caucasians to cheer for a Sergey Kovalev or a Tyson Fury. Why wouldn't they? That's their own demographic. But I bet you're allowed to cheer for Francis Ngannou in the UFC over a Stipe Miocic. I bet you're allowed to cheer for a Kamaru Usman over a Colby Covington. And there would be no problem about it. People at the end of the day, they're going to stick with their own. That's just how things go. Now, when you make a video or when you try to make a breakdown or if you try to put narratives out there, it's, important to be as logical and objective as possible. And that's what I try to do. But at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with people overall sticking with their own. But if it's obviously to a degree to where you're obviously very biased, or to the point overall to where you cannot be trusted with your analysis because you have a very big racial motivation, that's where the problem comes in.
Love him like I do. Something is wrong with you. You got a problem.
That's basically the same shit that you do. That's the same shit that you do with Terrence Bud Crawford. That's the same shit that you do with a lot of your other fighters because, once again, you're a pro-black cult.
Because everyone knows that you're supposed to love Canelo and you're supposed to hate those black guys. That's exactly what they're telling you. But over here, it's never been about who you like and who you don't like. It's about the truth. The truth does not
If you're talking about in terms of your channel, no, it's not.
discriminate. I always tell you guys, when you come to my channel, you come into my doctor's office. You may not hear what you want to hear.
Well, it's a good thing you're not an actual doctor, Dante, because if you were a doctor, people would be dying every day. At least in your doctor's office.
But you're going to get the diagnosis that you're supposed to get. When you go to your doctor's office and he finds out you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, you got diabetes or whatever the case is, he's not going to tell you what you want to hear. He's not going to say, oh, no, your health is good, blood pressure's good. No, he's going to tell you the truth, regardless if you want to hear it or not. That's what you get over here.
Right, but Dante, in your mind, if you're a doctor, let's say, basically with your Latino patients and your Caucasian patients, when it comes down to it, you're basically saying like, well, you're not good. But then when it comes to your black patients, you're basically saying like, oh, you know what, man, you're all good. Like, that's literally what you're doing. But it is what it is.
The whole truth and nothing but it. That's the reason why these racists,
And half of the shit, when it comes down to half of the shit that he says anyway about these Latino and Caucasian fighters isn't usually correct anyway.
Keep coming back. Think about it. You got the majority of old media saying exactly what these racists want to hear. Damn near saying that Canelo Alvarez is the greatest fighter of all time. Greater than Ali, Mayweather,
Well, why overall would you take that as an insult, Dante? Or at least, why would you take it as an insult that Canelo compares himself to a Floyd Mayweather Jr.? That's him complimenting Floyd Mayweather Jr., right? Come on.
Body, right? They're saying everything you want to hear. But you still come back over here. Why? Because you know what I say, it makes logical sense. You know that it's the truth. That's why you keep coming back. And that's why when these type of fans fill up my comment section,
People come back to Dante's channel and they come back to other channels like this because it's pretty much a shock factor. It's like when Shannon Sharp, whenever he talks about LeBron James versus Michael Jordan, Shannon Sharp actually usually has some good takes as well, so I'm not going to completely throw him under the bus or anything. But, it's kind of like Nick Wright, or some of these other ones. Ryan Hollins, I believe, is his name. These guys may get attention, and a big part of the reason why they get so much attention is because they have so many bad takes that so many people are like, is this dude for real?
They never really disagree with anything that I say. The only thing they really always say is stop hating on Canelo.
What's unfortunate, but very obvious, is that usually illogical points tend to get way more attention than what logical points do. Whatever is more lucrative, whatever overall seems to be more disastrous, that's going to get more attention.
That's it. But going back to the comparison, so let's just say if it's true that Canelo did say, you need to fight better competition. Boy, oh boy, the irony of him saying that, or even the fans.
No, it's really not ironic at all. Because Canelo Alvarez, all in all, look at how many fighters that he's fought that have been A-class. Of course, Dante, he's going to try to tell you that overall, he's fighting nothing but bums. But, of course, for those of us that are logical and objective, we know that that's not the truth. Caleb Plant, at the end of the day, is an A-grade fighter. Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, even Sergey Kovalev. I wouldn't say that he was A-plus at that point in time in his career, but he probably was an A-minus. All those guys are way better than any of the fighters that Gervonta Tank Davis has recently fought, besides maybe Leo Santa Cruz.
Saying it. Who looks better right now, guys, in terms of fighting good competition? You have
Canelo Alvarez, and it's not even close. And you can try to pull up this bullshit about, he's facing these Caucasian fighters. Oh, that's good and well, but when it comes down to it, you can tell the difference between an elite Caucasian fighter and someone who's just a part of the Bum of the Month club. Like, Idris Velasquez, for example, that's not an A-grade Caucasian fighter. Caleb Plant, you can tell, is an A-grade Caucasian fighter. Same with Billy Joe Saunders. Same overall with Callum Smith. It is what it is.
Yes. That avoided all of the best competition in the deeper divisions at 154 and 160. He moves all the way up to 168. He waits for the best champion, David Benavidez, to be stripped of the title, and that's when he attacks. So while you guys said that this is a Mexican sport, the sport is dominated by Mexicans, Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting nothing but Mexicans, and the best Mexicans. It's not like he's fighting...
No, he's not fighting the best Mexicans. Does anyone look at Mario Barrios as the best Mexican fighter at 140 pounds? Is he? Or is that Jose Ramirez? Is he calling out Oscar Valdez? Is he calling out Miguel Berchelt? Is he calling out any of these fighters? No, he's not.
Against the weaker Mexicans, but avoiding, maybe the most dangerous Mexican.
That's exactly what he's doing. Not only is he avoiding the most elite Latino or black fighters, he's not facing any elite fighters in general. I mean, he hasn't fought... When's the last time Gervonta Tank Davis really fought an elite opponent? It was Leo Santa Cruz.
Right? So while Gervonta is fighting all of the best Mexicans, who is Canelo Alvarez fighting? He's fighting all of the C-level white fighters.
The C-level white fighters. Now let's take a look at all these fighters. When it comes down to it, let's take a look at all these fighters and let's see overall what level they should be. Sergey Kovalev, who was a former top 10 pound-for-pound fighter and was coming off of 2 very decent wins. He's allegedly a C-grade fighter. You expect me to believe that? Billy Joe Saunders, who was a multiple weight division champion and undefeated at the time. Sure, he did not have A-grade power, but he still was a very decently slick boxer. A person all in all that was an A-grade fighter. Callum Smith was the Ring Magazine champion at 168 pounds. So it is what it is. And then, of course, you have Caleb Plant, who was undefeated and the IBF champion. But allegedly, these guys are C-grade fighters. But if Terrence Crawford, if he faces a Victor Postal, someone who really doesn't have a whole lot of big wins in his career, of course, I'm not saying a lot of these guys do is, either. But when it comes down to it all in all, apparently when Terrence Crawford defeats Idris Velasquez or Victor Postal, all of a sudden he puts these Caucasian fighters on a high level. That's what he says.
Because we can't...
Once again, you notice that Andre Ward with these guys, You notice that Andre Ward's legacy is never questioned, even though 90% of the elite fighters that he ever fought were Caucasian fighters. How come Andre Ward, all in all, isn't remembered as someone who fought weak fighters because they were Caucasian?
Even say they're even the best white fighters, because the best white fighters are fighters like Lomachenko and Josh Taylor. Those are the best white fighters.
Well, those are very, very good white fighters, but when it comes down to it, you can tell that a lot of these white fighters as well, with the exception of Rocky Fielding and Avni Yildirim, who I would really count more as Middle Eastern, but it is what it is, you can tell that those guys are A-grade white fighters. Once again, fighters like Aegis Kavalauskas and Victor Postal, you can tell all in all that those guys are not A-grade white fighters, or Caucasians. Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, and even Sergey Kovalev at that point in time, they were all A-grade fighters. It is what it is.
Right? So once again, if you guys are saying that Canelo or Gervonta...
And notice that he did not mention Tyson Fury. Because he hates Tyson Fury with a burning passion. He wishes that Tyson Fury would get ran over by a bus.
Tank Davis, rather. If you guys are saying that Davis, he needs to fight somebody, he needs to fight guys on his level or on a higher level, you guys are telling everyone that Mexican fighters are inferior to black fighters. Once again...
No, basically what they're saying is that, all in all, is that Gervonta Tank Davis, he's not usually facing elite fighters. Because Mario Barrios, when it comes down to it, is not an A-grade fighter. This next dude, whoever the hell he's facing, is not an A-grade fighter. Let's just be real.
You will never hear me say, or anybody, if in fact, every single time a fighter who's not black even beats a black fighter who's undefeated and has a name, the boxing world acts like that fighter just beat Goliath. Tyson Fury, for example, is
I don't necessarily think, all in all, that you have the worst point there. But Dante, there's been plenty of times where a Latino fighter or a Caucasian fighter, they may beat a black fighter, and from your side, there's been an excuse. Like when Vasyl Lomachenko defeated Guillermo Rigondeaux, or when Virgil Ortiz defeated Maurice Hooker, or when Jose Ramirez defeated Maurice Hooker. I remember that day just like it was yesterday. Jose Ramirez got a very good win over Maurice Hooker. That was when Maurice Hooker was undefeated. He knocked him out within 6 rounds. And what was Dante trying to say? Oh, well, yeah, sure, going into the fight it was 50-50, but Maurice Hooker, he was never really known for being A-grade and all sort of stuff. And I agree to a certain degree, but you got to keep the same energy.
Perfect example. They made a statue for Tyson Fury in the UK because he beat Deontay Wilder.
Yes, a fighter that you had in your top 10 pound for pound previously, but because you did not want or expect Tyson Fury to get past him, all of a sudden Deontay Wilder is horseshit according to you. Notice how Dante does that?
But they didn't make
And he's going to do the same thing to Canelo Alvarez, or at least what he's going to say about Jamal Charlo is that, oh, Jamal Charlo, he wasn't the same when Canelo Alvarez beat him. He's already putting that excuse in the threshold.
Statue for him when he beat Vladimir Klitschko. You see what I'm saying? Because they know that, like I told you, statistically, the black fighter is the Goliath in boxing.
Crypto.com Visa card. A metal card. Powered by crypto.
Because the majority of the greatest fighters have lost to black fighters. That is a fact. That's not up for debate. Nothing I'm going to tell you in this video is opinion. It can all be researched.
Dante, not only the majority of the things that you say are opinion, they're delusion. I'm not saying that you don't have points here and there, but about 90% of what you say is usually delusion.
Canelo Alvarez, he had an opportunity to really, truly be one of the greats. Canelo is not even...
He is one of the greats. You can say whatever you want, Dante. Canelo is one of the greats. You can't fight the amount of champions that he has fought and beat the type of people that he has beat and not be one of the greats. But you're going to call Terrence Crawford one of the greats. And, you know, I would say that he's a great fighter, but I can't call him an all-time great fighter. I can't put him on the same level as Canelo. Like, Canelo, in my opinion, he's already crossed that threshold of being a top 40, possibly even top 30 boxer of all time. Like, Canelo, he's on that level. Terrence ain't on that level because I can't claim that he's really beat any definitive A-class fighters. But Canelo, when you take a look at him, I mean, he's an all-time great fighter.
the greatest today. I've already told you this, and I've already used this analogy, and I'm going to keep using it. You can't go out there and only race against the slowest guys on the field and claim you're the fastest man in the world. It does not.
Right, but Canelo Alvarez isn't competing against the slowest guys in the world. Just because they're Caucasian, and I understand that Caucasians, they're not usually as dominant in the sport overall as Latino fighters or overall as black fighters. But when it comes down to it all in all, these Caucasian fighters that Canelo Alvarez is facing, they're A grade. It is what it is.
Work that way.
Right? I bet you money that of Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, notice that he said Vasyl Lomachenko. Why did he still say that Vasyl Lomachenko was one of the best fighters out there when Vasyl Lomachenko, he has a recent loss to Teofimo Lopez? Could it possibly be because he sees an edge there? Or overall an advantage? Because if Gervonta Tank Davis were to defeat Lomachenko, that maybe all in all that, he could give extra credit to Gervonta Tank Davis? Or when it comes to Josh Taylor, could it be that if Josh Taylor were to move up to 147 and Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford were able to defeat him, that he could give even extra credit to them?
Anybody can be undisputed in the...
But, divisions all in all where Caucasian fighters or Latino fighters are definitively the best and there almost is no black fighter threat. Like when you talk about the heavyweight division, all of a sudden he starts trying to downplay a certain amount of these fighters or a certain amount of other things. Like a Tyson Fury or an Alexander Usyk.
Weakest division in boxing. Once again, why do you...
You see that? All of a sudden now, if that were Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade in that division, he'd be saying overall that that'd be one of the most talented divisions in all of boxing.
I think Canelo Alvarez decided not to unify at 154 and 160. I had my reporter Skip ask Canelo the question, why didn't you unify at 154 and 160? Do you think Canelo Alvarez said because Demetrius Andrade is a horrible fighter? Do you think he said that? No, he didn't say that. You know what he said? He said he started to stutter and he said, it's because of the promoters. He blamed it on the promoters.
And I don't necessarily have a problem with people stating all in all that maybe Canelo that, he realizes that Demetrius Andrade is somewhat of a threat. But then you better have the same energy with Gervonta Tank Davis or other black fighters.
Which proves that he didn't even believe himself when he said that Andrade is a horrible fighter. But once again, these are the code words that he uses when it comes to dangerous black fighters. If you want to really know if Canelo Alvarez feels that a black fighter is extremely dangerous, all you have to do is wait for him to say two words or use two words, either payday or horrible, right? When he uses those words, we know what it is. That means Canelo was watching this fight and said, oh man, that's a bad boy. I don't want none of that smoke. Now let's go ahead and get back into, once again, why you have all of these black people that are praising Canelo Alvarez. The funny thing is, all of these fighters praising Canelo, from Devin Haney to Gervonta Tank Davis, and the list goes on and on. If they were in Canelo Alvarez's weight class, Canelo would be calling them horrible fighters. And he would be saying, they just want a payday. That is a fact. Canelo, he'll fight Avni Yildirim. He'll fight Caleb Plant.
Yes, Avni Yildirim and Rocky Fielding, we all know that those guys are not A-grade fighters. But Caleb Plant is an A-grade fighter. So is Billy Joe Saunders. So is so is overall Callum Smith. And Sergey Kovalev.
Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, but then Demetrius Andrade, the man who has been chasing him for 6 years, only wants a payday, even though Andrade was the champion before Canelo was the champion. Canelo was his mandatory. How do you explain how the champion wants a payday? Oh, but you gave that payday to, what's his name? What was his name? I don't even remember his name now. Smith. Was it Caleb Smith? No, not Caleb Smith, his brother. Liam Smith.
Now, Liam Smith definitely is not an A-grade fighter. That dude was about a C-class fighter. But a lot of the other fighters that Canelo has fought, clear A-grade fighters, just putting it out there, all the A-grade fighters that Canelo has fought, in my opinion, if I can remember them all. Of course, you have Gennady Golovkin, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Miguel Cotto, Sergey Kovalev, Danny Jacobs, Araceli Lara. All right, I believe that's about 8 fighters right now, if not 9. Austin Trout when he was A grade. All right. I mean, and the list may even go on.
Liam Smith, right? But you didn't mind making a payday with Liam Smith. Coincidentally, right after Andre was stripped of the title, all of a sudden now Canelo wants to fight for that same belt, just like he did at 168. He didn't want to fight Demetrius. When David Benavidez was the champion at 168, he didn't want to be undisputed at 168. Now all of a sudden, the best fighter at 168, with the only fighter with power in the division, he gets stripped. Now you want to be undisputed.
Right, but if we're going to talk about power when it comes down to it, and just because you have A grade power, and this is what I've already said in my opinion, I don't think that any of those guys really have enough power, in my opinion, to really beat a Canelo Alvarez. This is my view. I don't think that David Benavidez has enough power to beat Canelo. I mean, he has decent power, but is it like, is it on a whole nother level? No, it's not.
Did you guys know that Canelo also wanted to be undisputed at 160, but before Andre became champion there? Yeah, he wanted to be undisputed there until Andre became a champion. Until Jamal Charlo became his mandatory. Then he said, forget that. Forget that. Becoming undisputed ain't even that important. It ain't even all that serious. Canelo is on a white food diet, and you got the nerve to talk.
Right, but your argument, Dante, is that, well, Latino fighters and black fighters are usually more dominant. That's why Canelo ain't facing them, right? But we have to take a look at the context. We have to take a look overall at things three-dimensionally. And you can take a look at Caleb Plant. He's an elite fighter. There's no doubt about that.
Talk about Gervonta when he's fighting nothing but Mexican fighters, and I'm talking about the best Mexican fighters available?
No, he's not.
Can you guys name me one great? Can you name me one great fighter? I'm talking about from Sugar Ray Leonard to Ali to Floyd Mayweather to everyone. Can you name me one of the greats that completely avoided fighting the best undefeated black fighters and Mexicans and only wanted to fight against white/European fighters? Not Pernell Whitaker, not James Toney, not Roy Jones Jr., not Ali, not Floyd Mayweather.
Right, but the problem is that Canelo is not just fighting against white fighters, Dante. And the white fighters that he is facing are A-grade fighters. It'd be different if he was facing Victor Postals or Aegis Kavalauskas, or, repeated Rocky Fieldings or Avni Yildirim's. Or Avni Yildirim's, or whatever the fuck his name is. But he's not doing that. And on top of that, he has great wins over Lara, over Trout, over Danny Jacobs,
Not Terrence Crawford. Canelo Alvarez is the only...
This man says not Terrence Crawford. How many elite black fighters, really how many elite fighters in general has he ever fought?
one doing this. We all know all of the top tier fighters would have beat all of those champions at 168 if they were all naturally the same way. We know this.
How do you know that? Because Caleb Plant, all in all, he's not completely, untalented. Basically you tried to say that, all in all that, these guys at 147, if they're the same natural. I don't like that argument because once again, usually the lighter guys, they look more skilled. Wouldn't Jerome Boots Ennis and Sean Porter and, Keith Thurman and Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. and Yordan Sugas, wouldn't they debatably beat a Jamal Charlo? Because Jamal Charlo, I'm not sure if he's as skilled as any of those fighters are. But does that mean that Jamal Charlo is not an A-grade fighter? So once again, I've never been a huge supporter of that argument.
You put Jerron Ennis against all those guys. You put Terrence Crawford. Hell, you put Lomachenko against those guys. The only reason David Benavidez didn't become undisputed is because Caleb Plant did not want...
So, does David Benavidez beat any of those fighters if they're in the same weight class? Does David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo or Andrade, if they're around the same weight and same size, do they beat a Vasyl Lomachenko? Do they beat a Terrence Crawford? Do they beat any of those fighters? I highly doubt it. But who knows? That's why you can't go by that argument.
fight David. Caleb really didn't want to fight Canelo, but Canelo just offered him way too much money. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. Same thing with Kovalev. Kovalev didn't really want that fight. It was an offer he could not refuse because they all turned down the fight. All of those white fighters turned down the Canelo fight originally. Canelo came back to the table and gave them more money because Canelo was like, "You not getting away from this easy ass whooping I'm going to give you." Canelo is the type of person that'll lower the basketball rim just to dunk it and claim that he won the dunking contest.
Well, not really, but that's kind of what Gervonta Tank Davis has been doing. I mean, once again, let's be real. Who has he really fought?
Now let's talk about all these black boxers that continuously praise Canelo Alvarez. You know, the funny thing about it is, while a lot of black fighters are praising Canelo Alvarez, the majority of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time, they have pretty much corroborated every single thing that I've said about.
Right, but I don't really take that very seriously. It's no offense against them, but let's be real. Which Mexican fighters are usually hating against Canelo Alvarez? It's usually the ones that were not looked at as the number one pound for pound fighter of their generation. So the Eric Morales, the all in all, the Marco Antonio Barreras, the Juan Manuel Marquezes. It's no offense, but those salty ass bitches, they can take themselves overall to the Pacific Ocean with the amount of salt that they have in their system. Because when it comes down to it, they know that Canelo Alvarez is going to be looked at on a completely different level compared to them. Because none of those fighters that I just mentioned were ever looked at as possibly the number one pound for pound fighter. But you notice that the only Mexican fighter, probably in history, in my opinion, that can say that he was on that Canelo Alvarez level, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., he's the only one that really gives Canelo Alvarez compliments. Because he knows all in all that Canelo Alvarez is his successor.
Canelo Alvarez in his selection of opponents. I always tell you guys, boxing is based on race, nationality, and pride in that order. You know, shout out to Aki because I would always tell him before, I used to tell him that, 75% of these fans are racist. And when I talk about...
I agree that, a lot of them are racist, but Dante, so are you. You're within that same boat. You're just you're a different demographic. It's kind of like, if we were to create a racist Noah's Ark, Dante's on that boat. He's just not a Caucasian or a Latino.
Fans, of course, we're talking about the non-black fans because just like black people are only 12% of the population, they're a very small percent of the boxing fans as well. Now, the reason why it may seem like there's more black boxing fans is just because of the dominance of black boxers in the sport of boxing.
Well, of course, that's usually how it works. Whatever demographic is more dominant for that sport, there's going to be more of that demographic that pays attention to it. How many, black fans do you think watch tennis? At least when it comes to the men's tennis circuit. Probably not many because there hasn't really been a black dominant male player, at least one that has won repeated Grand Slams ever since Arthur Ashe. So who do you think is mainly watching those? Now, of course, there's Rafael Nadal. He's from Spain. He's a Spaniard. And he has a little bit of darker complexion. So the Latinos and the Hispanics, of course, they kind of connect with him. But the majority of the time, it's usually going to be Caucasians. Because you have people like Daniel Medvedev or Roger Federer or especially Novak Djokovic. People like that. Now, if you're talking about basketball, that's something that attracts everybody, but all in all, mainly black fans. Football, that attracts both Caucasians and black fans because those are the two most dominant demographics within the whole entire sport. Boxing is a sport that will attract a lot of Latinos and blacks especially because all in all, those are the two most dominant demographics in that sport.
So outside of the black boxing fans, I always tell you guys the vast majority of boxing fans are racist, hands down. And we know this just by looking at the racial double standards every day that you guys hear me expose and talk about. Now, shout out to Aki because I was talking to Aki and he said something that really stuck because I was telling him how 75% of these fans are racist and he was like, nah, man, it's more like 95%. He said, you know, the difference between you and me, Dante, is when you talk to these type of fans, they stay on code. They try to act like racism doesn't exist. What are you talking about, right? They just try to stick to their points, trying to defend non-black fighters and making it seem like it has absolutely nothing to do with race. Why they praise.
Well, I do think that a certain amount of it has to do with race, but Dante, he's always such a victim that he's always going to put everything in that racial category because he has a victim type of mentality.
All of the non-black fighters and not the black ones, right? He said, but when they talk to me, because I'm not black, they are open with their racism. They say the most racist stuff when they're talking to me. And I was like, wow, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, of course, because people overall, they feel like they can hide a little bit more when they're not talking to the direct demographic that they may feel some sort of way about. It is what it is. You know, just like someone, they may talk all that shit behind your back, but they may not say it in front of your face.
Because I've always interpreted what these fans say in the comment section as what they really want to say about black people. And then Aki, he confirmed to me.
Well, of course not. Because they can't get away with the same shit overall. But it is what it is.
That is what they really are saying when there is no black guy in the room. And Aki's not the only person that told me this. I've heard many people say this, from white guys to Mexican guys, the ones that were not racist. They've told me these stories how they'll be talking.
The ones that were not racist. So the ones overall that may be wigger white boys or ones overall that maybe go along with the pro-black cult. Those are the ones that aren't racist to you, Dante.
Boxing with boxing fans. All of a sudden, just because they said something that could not be refuted, something true about a black fighter that makes him look good, or maybe they criticize someone who was not black, and then all of a sudden...
Right, but that's not the main problem. The problem with new media channels like Dante and Aki TV, they'll go super duper far out of their way to criticize certain Caucasian fighters and Latino fighters, but if a black fighter does the same thing or does something very similar, you won't hear anything from them. You know, like I did a video a very long time ago, probably like several months ago now, where I said that Jamal Charlo, he was not interested in David Benavidez, and he was facing a C-class fighter and Juan Montiel next. It literally took them to be trapped into a corner to finally talk about it.
That person, he will call that white person, he will call the Mexican, he will call whoever the person is that's not black, he will call him an N-word lover, right? I've been told this by multiple people. You know, I've heard white dudes say, yeah, they've called me N-word lovers, they've called me wiggers, they call me all kind of stuff, right? Coincidentally, these are the same people that will post comments in the comment section saying, hey man, why do you got to talk about race? You know, they act like talking about racism is their...
You know, when it comes down to it all in all, you know, certain people, they may say overall, oh, well, you know, that's not fair to call a Key TV like a wigger white boy just because he sticks up for black fighters. It's not necessarily because he sticks up for black fighters. Aki TV, that's pretty much what he is, though. He's a wig. He's like a wigger white boy when it comes down to it. That white boy overall that wants to be black so bad, and overall, you know, tries to out-rap certain people, you know, all sort of bullshit. Tries to, you know, get all this culture, you know, with the blacks when it comes down to it. That's pretty much what Aki TV is. You can tell with the way that he talks. You can tell with the way overall that he does things. He wishes that he was a black man. You know, except he's a Middle Eastern, so he can't be called a wigger white boy. He would have to be called something else.
Kryptonite. They act like you just pulled out a cross and some garlic to a damn vampire when you start talking about racism. That's because they are the ones we're talking about. And don't worry, guys, just bear with me, because I'm tying all this in with black people or black boxers that continuously praise the fighter that they say is the golden boy at the time, which is now Canelo Alvarez. But let me just make one more point about that staying on code. Now, Sean Zito, this guy is a reporter that works for Fight Hype. He turned out to be a racist. I thought he was a cool guy when I first met him, but then his true colors start coming out, and he started making all of these Fox News type talking points defending Donald Trump when Donald Trump said there was good and bad on both sides.
So, well, no, I don't think Donald Trump overall, I don't really remember him saying that there was good and bad on both sides. I remember him saying that there was bad on both sides with that little incident, and there was. So it is what it is. Dante is one of these, you know, overall, very simple, super liberal, pro-black cult, guys. That's all he is.
He was giving the Nazis a pass that was marching down in Charlottesville. In the comments that he made showing his disdain and disapproval for Colin Kaepernick getting a Nike deal by saying to me, well, isn't he...
First of all, it's Colin Kaepernick. And I don't like Colin Kaepernick either. Because that dude overall basically tried to create chaos throughout the NFL overall in order to change them. And on top of that, Colin Kaepernick, he can't play worth a shit. You have all these people overall that basically try to say, oh, he's being blackballed and all this other shit. When it comes down to it, he ain't being blackballed. It's just Colin Kaepernick, he can't play.
Doing this for all...
And on top of that, he's bringing so much chaos to the NFL that's affecting their, constituency. It's affecting their fan base. Why the hell would they hire him?
People in the hood.
I mean, that's like me trying to hire someone over that I know is going to be very, very negative to my fan base. That's going to be losing fans, losing me money, basically. And on top of that, you can barely play. Like, why the hell would I hire you?
How come he isn't giving all that money that Nike is giving him to the people in the hood? And actually, to quote him correctly, he used the word ghetto. So what he was really trying to say is, it shouldn't even really matter if these black people are getting murdered because they're just black people that live in the ghetto. That's what he was saying essentially. And I told him, I said, well, Trayvon Martin didn't die in the hood. He died in a suburban area. Matter of fact, a lot of these guys died in suburban areas. And that was the moment where I told him to his face, you're coming off as a racist now. And he said, I don't care, man. I don't care what people think. And I said, okay, good. So when I start calling you a racist, you shouldn't be offended at all because you don't care, right?
Dante always has these dumbass arguments. He basically said, oh, okay, so you don't care that I'll call you a racist. So basically, all in all, that, that means that you're a racist. But then at the same time, what does Dante always say? Well, if you're not a racist, then you shouldn't have to defend yourself. So Dante makes no fucking sense whatsoever.
Now, guys, this is the same reporter who interviewed Teofimo Lopez and was telling him, shouldn't Devin Haney have to knock out Linares to get a fight with you? This man was trying to create additional stipulations.
And perhaps that man is a racist. I don't know. But I've never been big into politics anyway when it comes down to it. But I never was this big Donald Trump hater or anything like that. Personally, I don't think that a lot of these guys behind the scenes are great people anyway, whether they be conservative or liberal. But personally, I can't stand the liberals. I can't stand them. But it is what it is.
He's trying to coach Teofimo into saying, yeah, he should have to do much more. That way, if he doesn't get a knockout, I can easily say, I don't have to fight him because he didn't get a knockout, right? But yet we all know that Kambosos didn't have to get a knockout to fight him. And we all know there's going to be tons of fighters.
That's fair. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad argument.
That Teofimo is going to fight in the future that's not coming off of a knockout win. Hell, Canelo didn't even knock out Austin Trout to get the Floyd Mayweather fight. So why all of a sudden is this additional stipulation created by a reporter, right? And then this same reporter, Sean Zito, then he interviews Devin Haney. Devin Haney puts him on the spot. He says, who do you want to see me fight? Keep in mind, this is at a time where everyone is talking about Devin Haney versus Teofimo Lopez. This is at a time when Teo and Devin, they're going back and forth. Everything that they say about fighting each other, it gets views. This is at that time. So once again, Devin asked Sean, who do you want to see me fight? And this man didn't even say Teofimo versus Devin Haney. You know who he said? He said, I want to see you fight Gervonta Tank Davis. Of course you do.
Well, you really shouldn't have a problem with that because Gervonta Tank Davis, he's the one to fight the best, right? It is what it is. Now, I understand what you're saying, and maybe that guy does have a racial motivation, but when it comes down to it all in all, if you're bitching and complaining that people are avoiding Devin Haney and he's being so avoided, you shouldn't really have a problem with Gervonta Tank Davis versus Devin Haney.
The lesser of two evils. While Teofimo gets to fight whoever he wants, you want to see the two black guys fight against each other. We know what time it is. And on top of that, he never said to Gervonta, shouldn't Devin Haney have to get a knockout to fight against you? Oh, because it's two black fighters, so he doesn't care. He doesn't care if he gets a knockout, if he looks horrible or whatever. Devin don't have to do nothing special to get a Gervonta Tank Davis fight. He ain't got to do nothing special to get a Shakur Stevenson fight either. Yeah, we know what time it is. So anyway, guys, everything that I told you about Sean. Now, this was after, like when he started talking about all this Donald Trump and this anti-Colin Kaepernick stuff, way before that, when I...
It surprises me overall, like how many names they mispronounce. It's not Kaepernick, it's Kaepernick. And if you watch football and actually knew what the fuck you were talking about, you would know that. But it is what it is.
I thought he was cool. I had him on my podcast. Matter of fact, I had him on my podcast about 2 or 3 times. Now, the one time he was on the show with me, it was interesting because he was staying on code. We started talking about the racial double standards, and naturally, he started to act like racism didn't exist at all. I felt like I was in that movie, The Sixth Sense, where I see dead people and don't nobody believe me, right? I see racist people, and everyone is saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see it. You're just cuckoo. You're insane in the membrane. Something is wrong with you.
Well, of course, racism does exist against black fighters. That's very clear. But Dante, basically what you've done is that you've created your own platform, which is very, very good. It's very great to create your own platform. But basically what you've done is to say, okay, well, if they're not going to give my fighters credit, the black fighters credit, I'm going to do the same thing to Caucasian fighters and Latino fighters. And that's not something that you want to aspire to do, but it is what it is.
So anyway, we're talking about the hatred that Floyd Mayweather receives, and he says it has absolutely nothing to do with race. We're going back and forth, right? It was funny, though, because after we do the show, we talk off air, and then all of a sudden, I say it because I'm good at reading people. And I said, look, man, I know it's kind of
Allegedly good at reading people.
hard for you
Dante is way more unintelligent than he thinks.
to admit that the racism exists because you're afraid that a lot of the racist people, they're going to come after you. They're going to probably start calling you N-word lovers and stuff like that. And you know what he said to me? He said, oh, I've been called that. I've been called that multiple times. I've even been called that when I was talking about Floyd Mayweather. So wait a minute. So when we was doing this show, you were acting like this had absolutely nothing to do with racism. And then after we do the show, then you admit that you've had fans call you racial slurs just because you said things that were true about Floyd Mayweather or whatever black fighter. That's called staying on code, guys. He stayed on code long enough for the show.
I understand what Dante is saying, but let's also be real. When we talk about someone like Aki TV doesn't just stick up for black fighters because he thinks it's the right thing to do. He sticks up for black fighters, especially over other fighters, because Aki TV, he's like a wigger white boy. He wishes overall that he was black deep down.
To end. So the question is, why does he feel the need to stay on code? Well, obviously it has something to do with being a racist, but on top of that, there is an intimidation factor. You don't want to piss off the other races. Because I told you already, the majority of boxing fans are racist. Meaning, no matter what they say, it doesn't have to be true. It just has to be popular. It just has to be in popular demand. And this brings...
I agree with that. That's why I said earlier on in the video that usually the things that get most of the viewings, it's not usually logical. It's usually illogical. Because whatever is usually more lucrative or viewed as more of a hot take, that's usually what's going to get the views.
Me to black fighters praising Canelo Alvarez. The bottom line is they are saying what they're supposed to say because, once again, this is the popular narrative. You see, these boxers are heavy into...
Right, but there's certain black boxers like Terrence Crawford that haven't been saying the same thing about him. So I believe personally that, Devin Haney, he's a person that has said a lot of shit. He even said at one point in time that he'll never let a white boy beat him in Vasyl Lomachenko. So Devin Haney ain't afraid overall what a lot of these other guys think. He obviously said something about Canelo because he believes that Canelo is the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Their Twitters and Instagrams and all that kind of stuff, and they want to be loved by everyone. So soon as you say something about Canelo Alvarez, those racist fans, they go in on you. They start filling up their Instagrams and all that kind of stuff. And those boxers are like, God damn, what did I say? Did I do something wrong? They automatically think that they're wrong for saying things that are true about Canelo Alvarez. Like Jamel Charlo is a perfect example. Before Jermell Charlo, he wanted to fight Canelo Alvarez. In fact, Jermell Charlo had been chasing, he was one of the three champions that was chasing Canelo at 154. Jamel Jamal and Demetrius Andre.
Let me just say this. If Jamal, I don't even give Jamal, who in my opinion is a decently more skilled boxer than Jamal, I don't even give Jamal that much of a chance. If Jamal fought Canelo, he'd get killed.
All champions at 154, and Canelo Alvarez did not have a belt. And Canelo Alvarez, he refused to fight any of these guys. Talk about becoming undisputed. That's when being undisputed really means something, when you conquer a deep division like 154 or 147. So anyway,
a deep division like 154, what really is that deep? I mean, at the time, all in all, maybe you can say that it was deep, but let's be real. Who the hell is Jermell Charlo really beaten that we can consider super duper deep? I mean, who really did he beat? That one dude, God, who the hell was that one fighter that defeated Julian J-Rock Williams? I don't even remember. Fucking, I think he was like Dominican or somewhere from South America. I can't remember. Of course, Dominican, they're part of the Caribbean, but he was either a Caribbean fighter or a person from South America. I can't remember. The dude that Erickson Lubin just recently knocked out, I can't remember. I think his name was Rojas or some bullshit like that. But when it comes down to it all in all, 154 right now is not a very deep division.
Mel was fighting at 154. He was an enemy to the Canelo Alvarez fans because he was a threat. Because he was calling out Canelo just like his brother was. But then all of a sudden, years later, Jamel, he figured out that when he said anything positive about Canelo, no matter what it was, even if it wasn't even true, all of a sudden, the Canelo Alvarez fans, they loved the comment.
But calling Canelo Alvarez the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world, that pretty much is true.
That he made. They didn't love Jermell Charlo, and they didn't like Jermell Charlo, but they liked the comment that he made, right? So Jermell, he said, wait a minute, this is working. Then he started getting bolder and bolder. He started realizing since they liked it, then he started coming out and said, hey, y'all, you guys don't even have to worry about me. I'm not even fighting in Canelo's division. You see, he said that because he understood, oh, so as long as I'm not a threat to Canelo, these fans won't attack me. Okay, then Viva Mexico. He started going on this channel or going on his live saying Viva Mexico and hey man, Canelo was the greatest, etc.
So basically you're calling Jermell Charlo a sellout.
Etc. Why? Because he does not want to deal with the backlash. Because you got to have thick skin to tell the truth all the time. Because it
I agree with that, but Dante, you don't have thick skin, nor do you tell the truth all the time. You're one of the most sensitive, over-emotional dudes out here.
Definitely comes with repercussions. For example, all the years that I was criticizing Keith Thurman for not fighting Errol Spence, all the years I criticized Anthony Joshua for avoiding Deontay Wilder. And the list just...
Right, but there's a reason overall why you criticize Keith Thurman or criticize Anthony Joshua, at least for allegedly avoiding that fighter. And I've never been super big on this narrative that Anthony Joshua just completely avoided Wilder. But when it comes down to it all in all, the reason why you criticize them is because they're avoiding a black fighter. That's why. But if it came to Gervonta Tank Davis, overall avoiding a Vasyl Lomachenko, all of a sudden you would not talk about it as much.
Goes on and on. I've always exposed fighters that were avoiding someone or whatever they...
No, you try to expose Caucasian and Latino fighters that allegedly avoid someone, but when it comes to black fighters, you don't do that. Or at least when it comes to black fighters, possibly avoiding Caucasian or Latino fighters. He'll only do that if there's another black fighter in the conversation. So if a black fighter is avoiding another black fighter, he'll talk about it. But if it's a black fighter avoiding a Caucasian fighter or a black fighter avoiding a Latino fighter, he's not going to talk about it.
We're doing,
or depending on where they're ranked. So if they're debatably the number one pound-for-pound fighter, he's not going to talk about it either.
Criticize him for it,
That's why even though he says at the same time that Terrence Crawford is allegedly the most avoided man, in the whole entire sport, or, at 147, how many times is he going to say that Errol Spence is avoiding him? Because he has no problem saying that Danny Garcia and Keith Thurman and all these other guys are avoiding him, but when it comes to Errol Spence Jr., all of a sudden he's off the hook. Interesting.
Well, speaking facts. You think these fans ever cared? These Canelo fans, they never cared. They never cared if I was speaking the truth about other people. Or let me rephrase that, other black people. They didn't care. They only care when it's mainly a Mexican fighter or someone else who's not black that they happen to like at the time, right? This is why black people do it. This is why Gervonta does it and other black people do it. They don't want to deal with the backlash. Another great example, I remember Devin Haney was doing an interview with DAZN, Akin Barak, and he was asked, who's the best right now? And Devin Haney did not mention Canelo Alvarez. He said Terrence Crawford and left it at that. And then he came out of nowhere and said, what about Canelo? And then Devin said, oh, yeah, Canelo too. Yeah, Canelo, pound for pound, whatever, right? You see how they had to push him to say it? Because at the end of the day, it's not about saying what's true. It's about saying what the fans want to hear.
Well, maybe, but once again, Devin Haney, he's not he's not a person overall that comes across to me as a person that likes to appease the other fan bases. I think Devin Haney, I think he knows where his bread is buttered. And I think overall he knows that his main constituency, his main fan base is the pro-blacks. It is what it is.
Old media has a lot of power because they still have all of the numbers. Old media can tell you right now, Anoa'i. For example, Canelo Alvarez can lose right now, and they'll start saying Anoa'i is pound for pound. He's greater than Floyd Mayweather, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, you'll have almost every black fighter, when you ask him, who's the best right now? Anoa'i.
I highly doubt that. Because in a way, I believe is how you pronounce his name. But that's a great example. Dante, why do you call Terrence Crawford an all-time great fighter when basically he pretty much has the same resume almost as an Inoue? Now, Terrence, I think that he has a better resume, actually a clearly better resume than Inoue, but it's somewhat along those lines. Like, Inoue, he looks like a great fighter, but he hasn't really fought anyone that's A grade. It's the same thing with Terrence Crawford. It is what it is. So why is Inoue someone who's very, very overhyped, according to you, but Terrence, who may have a similar resume, all of a sudden he's someone that's debatably number one pound for pound?
Right? Anoa'i. Every single time old media tells the boxing world who the best is, black boxers will often just repeat exactly what they say. If old media is saying it, it must be true.
So according to you, Dante, a lot of these black fighters, they sell out.
Because the majority of people, they believe it. So it must be true. Or it must be what they want to be.
So they're not necessarily magnanimous, according to you, or at least for, overall forgiving or overall, nice. They're basically weak. That's what you're saying. Mentally weak. And I'm not going to go as far to say that.
True. Right? You don't believe me when I tell you that these fighters, they will follow whatever old media says? Let me take you down memory lane. Do you guys remember Roman Gonzalez? Well, around the time that Andre Ward was considered pound for pound the best fighter in the world, I think this is when he kind of took a little bit of a hiatus and he was out of the ring. They start pushing for Roman Gonzalez to be pound for pound the best fighter in the world. And guys, this was before he even got a whole lot of exposure. This was before anyone ever really knew who he was. Nobody knew who he fought. Nobody knew any of the names that he beat. But all of a sudden, you would look everywhere, and you would see number one pound for pound. First, he was like on the top 10. First, he was like number 8. And I'm talking about, it seemed like it was only over months. He went from 8 to 6 to 3, and then he was number 1.
I don't necessarily have a problem with what Dante is trying to state here, but what I will say is this. A lot of people, and I understand why Dante thinks this way, because it looks like a certain amount of people after Vasily Lomachenko lost to Teofimo Lopez, they automatically just put Canelo Alvarez up there. But Canelo, in my opinion, and this is why I always said when Vasily Lomachenko was my number one pound for pound, I had Canelo Alvarez overall as my second overall pound for pound fighter because he clearly had a better resume than that of a Terrence Crawford. So that's why if you take a look at my videos or my list, it never was surprising when I already ranked Canelo over Terrence Crawford.
And the majority of these old media organizations had Roman Gonzalez at number 1. And like I said, this was before we even knew one name that he beat. right? And I BS you not, reporters start asking Floyd Mayweather and Roy Jones, who is pound for pound the best fighter in the world? They both said Roman Gonzalez. When old media told them Golovkin.
Floyd Mayweather Jr., all in all, is his own man. He's an individual. And Floyd Mayweather Jr., one thing I'll say about him, he's not afraid to say whatever the hell he wants. And Floyd Mayweather Jr., one thing I give him credit for, he's not a person that usually has a racial motivation, or at least a super huge one. So whatever he usually says is going to be the truth. It is what it is. Floyd Mayweather Jr. has a lot of courage usually with what he says. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is the same person that said that Jeremy Lin, that he was so popular in the NBA, really, and that he was getting all this hype because he was Asian. And that was the truth. It is what it is. People can get offended by that, but that was absolutely the truth, because Asians, of course, are not really known overall for usually being all-time great basketball players. You know, it is what it is.
Was pound for pound the best.
Whenever you have a demographic that all of a sudden shows up as very dominant in a sport that usually they don't dominate in, they're going to get a lot of hype. It's the same thing with Tiger Woods and Patrick Mahomes in their respective sports. Because Patrick Mahomes, when it comes to the quarterback position, that is usually a Caucasian-dominated field. When it comes to golf, that is usually a Caucasian-dominated field. Serena Williams, when it comes to tennis, that was usually a Caucasian-dominated field. So it is what it is.
They did the same thing. They followed suit. Oh, who's the best? Oh, let me go ahead and open the magazine and look at it. Oh, there it is right there. Golovkin is the best. When it comes to Roman Gonzalez, I wouldn't be surprised if Roy Jones or Floyd Mayweather never even watched the whole Roman Gonzalez fight. Because I know even at that time, I hadn't watched too much of Roland Gonzalez. I just kept seeing his name pop up on the internet. And I'm like, who is this guy? And this is the reason why you're always going to get black people praising whoever is on top, at least on top of old media's list, right? But I guess...
So then, basically what you're saying is that whatever these black fighters say, that they cannot be relied upon? Is that what you're saying?
Mexicans from Mexico, those fighters, you know, they're not...
So actually, we should take more into consideration what Caucasian fighters and Latino fighters say? Is that what you're saying, Dante?
Worried about the intimidation because they continue to criticize Canelo Alvarez for cherry picking, taking on...
No, Juan Manuel Marquez, Marco Antonio Barrera, and Eric Morales, they keep criticizing Canelo Alvarez because they some salty ass bitches. That's why. Because they know overall that they're not on the level, they never were on the level that Canelo Alvarez is. Once again, usually when you take a look at certain people that were as successful, or certain people that have a very high self-esteem of themselves, you know, they don't criticize usually other greats. And, you know, that's exactly why Julio Cesar Chavez, he's the only Mexican fighter that I've heard that gives Canelo Alvarez all the props in the world. You know why? Because once again, he knows that he's his successor.
On the weakest opponents, you flee from the deepest divisions, migrate to the weakest divisions, just so you can call yourself undisputed.
No, that's not what Canelo Alvarez did. That's what Mikey Garcia did. Mikey Garcia did that all in all so he could face these bums. That's what he did. So he didn't have to face the Yuriorkis Gamboas, or the Vasyl Lomachenkos, or the Terrence Crawfords. That's what he did. Or even the Jorge Linareses.
Sea-level white/European fighters that have no power. It's a joke, man. It's a complete joke. How sad is it? Floyd Mayweather, who was an old-ass man, age 36, going on 37, he was 15 pounds smaller than Canelo Alvarez, and this man was walking down Canelo. And just to prove to you that it was the same Canelo Alvarez...
Right, but would I necessarily allege that a Mayweather at that size would have more power than a Caleb Plant? I highly doubt it. The thing is, the differences between Mayweather is that he just all in all, first of all, he caught Canelo, I do believe, earlier on in his career. So I do believe Canelo is greater at this point in time. But not only that, Mayweather, you know, he's just a different fighter than those guys. It is what it is. There's another one overall with Gennady Golovkin. Did Mayweather ever have the power of a prime Gennady Golovkin? Not even close. Gennady is one of the hardest punchers personally ever in boxing history. He's probably, debatably, one of the 20 hardest hitters in boxing history. He may even be up there in the top 10 when it comes down to Gennady is that hard of a puncher when it comes down to it. And all in all, Canelo was able to walk him down. It is what it is.
Canelo fought Floyd the exact same way.
Basically, what I'm saying is that styles make fights.
He fought Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders. First, he comes out slow. He tries to box a little bit with him, and then eventually he turns it up. He did this with Floyd Mayweather to no avail, right? The more he...
Dante tries to make this narrative that Canelo Alvarez is the exact same fighter today that he was several years ago against Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not biting on that. I'm just not buying it. Canelo, you can tell, has adjusted against a certain amount of fighters. Now, does that mean, in my opinion, that he would beat a prime Floyd Mayweather Jr.? Probably not, but all in all, you can tell that Canelo Alvarez is a different fighter today. His feet are better. His defense is way better. His defense against the jab is way better. His head movement is better. His ring IQ is better. Canelo Alvarez is what he is at, basically the point where I would like to call his absolute peak.
Turned it up with Floyd the more he got hit. But you know what was really disrupting Canelo the whole night against Floyd? It was Floyd's jab. The jab was...
I agree.
Offsetting him and forcing him...
And I'm not sure if any fighter has a better jab than Floyd Mayweather Jr.
to reset the entire night. So what's crazy to me is when you look at Caleb Plant, you got this 6'1" natural super middleweight, and this man is out there throwing this damn water gun jab. I mean, he was throwing the jab like he was afraid that something was going to come back and hit him.
Because it was. Floyd Mayweather Jr., what a lot of people also don't understand is this. It's the same thing kind of like, with Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury has more difficulties against smaller fighters. If you have a fighter that is very, very tricky and very, very defensively responsible, like a Floyd Mayweather Jr., and very quick, a smaller target actually is even worse to face than the bigger target because they're so hard to hit compared to some of the other bigger targets. So that was also another big problem for Canelo Alvarez in that fight. Hitting Floyd Mayweather Jr. is completely different than trying to hit someone like a Caleb Plant who's about 6 foot. And, defensively responsible enough in that fight, but not enough to the point of a Floyd Mayweather Jr.
It was just this light touch jab. He would throw this light touch jab. See, the thing is, Floyd Mayweather, he'll throw a touch jab, but that's to set up a real jab, right? He'll kind of throw his...
By the way, hopefully this video does not cut out, but just in case it ends abruptly, it's probably because overall the space. But hopefully we can finish this video.
Arm out there as a touch jab, and then, as he's moving his hand, around from left to right, then all of a sudden he'll pop you with a real jab. But when it came to Caleb Plant, his touch jab was his actual jab. He didn't have a jab. And if you ain't got no jab, you're really in trouble against Canelo because that's his kryptonite. Canelo Alvarez is a sucker for a stiff.
That, I agree to a degree that used to be his kryptonite, but let me give Canelo Alvarez a lot of props. He has really improved overall against people with a very stiff jab. You can see it against Callum Smith. You can see it against Caleb Plant. You can see it against Billy Joe Saunders. Those are very slick fighters. Those guys are no joke. And Canelo, he completely embarrassed them.
Jab. You go back and watch the Kovalev fight. Matter of fact, go back and watch the Golovkin.
The Kovalev fight overall, Kovalev barely hit him with any jabs either. Now, Golovkin, he hit him with quite a few jabs, but Golovkin has one of the best jabs for a middleweight fighter that I've seen.
Fight. That's how Golovkin won the rematch.
But Canelo has improved even from those fights.
Or at least the win that he didn't get credit for. We know what it is. At the end of the day, like I told you, I'm going to say it again. Gervonta Tank Davis fighting nothing but the best Mexican fighters available in
He's not.
his division. And matter of fact, his next fight might be the toughest of his career. He's going up against Isaac Pitbull Cruz.
That's going to be the toughest of his career. A fighter overall who hasn't beat any fighters. Are you kidding me? A fighter who hasn't beat any A-class fighters. Are you serious, Dante? Oh my God.
This is how you know it's all BS when you hear these fans trying to say that Gervonta fights nothing but bums, tomato cans, he cherry picks, etc., etc. We know that's BS because when Pitbull wasn't fighting Gervonta, these same fans were praising Pitbull, right?
Right, but when it comes down to it, that's like me saying overall, like, I'm trying to think of a certain fighter. Maybe an up-and-comer right now. Like, I'm trying to think of an up-and-coming fighter. That's like me saying, like, Jerome Boots Ennis. He looks very, very impressive right now. But Jamel Charlo, he doesn't want to face, Brian Castano in a rematch. Instead, he wants to face Jerome Boots Ennis, who's a weight class smaller than him, and on top of that, inexperienced. That's like me saying overall, oh, well, people calling that a cherry pick, that's BS because we know how talented Jerron Boots Ennis is. That may be a bad example, but I can't think of another example in my opinion right now or in my head.
How many times did you ever hear Mexican fans say anything bad about Leo Santa Cruz? Did you ever hear any of them guys say...
I agree. People who discredit him for the Leo Santa Cruz win. I disagree with that one because I do think Leo Santa Cruz, that is for sure an A-class win.
Man, this guy is overrated. This guy is not that good. He gets more credit than he deserves. Have you ever heard them say that about Leo Santa Cruz? You didn't hear that, right? Mario Barrios, he was considered prospect of the year. Nope.
Right, Dante, but let's be real. Mario Barrios is not an A-grade fighter. Let's just stop.
Nobody said nothing bad about him. All of a sudden, soon as they know that he's most likely going to lose to Gervonta, now all of a sudden he's a trash fighter. These fans are forced to throw their own people or fighters under the bus just to try to discredit Gervonta.
But with you, it's a little bit different because you claim that Demetrius Andrade versus Billy Joe Saunders was a very big fight. You claimed overall that Canelo Alvarez versus Danny Jacobs at one point in time would be a very big fight. But then once those fights happened, then you discredited him for it.
It's not successful. Because once you said that Mexicans run the sport, hell, even if you said that black and Mexicans run the sport, you still can't criticize Gervonta for fighting nothing but Mexicans because by your own admission, you're admitting that he's fighting the best, right?
Right, but the problem isn't that he's facing Mexican fighters, Dante. The problem is that he's not facing elite fighters.
You believe that he's fighting the best in that division. And when they say stuff like, oh, well, why doesn't Gervonta fight the other black guys? But the funny thing is, you had never praised these black guys before. You guys have never praised any of these black fighters, but now you want them to fight. There is no doubt it's not even up for debate. Gervonta is fighting much better competition than Canelo has been fighting in the last 3 years.
No, he hasn't. That's a very stupid argument. In fact, that's not even debatable. Canelo Alvarez has been facing way better competition. It's not even close.
Since 2018. The best fighter he fought since 2018 was Danny Jacobs, and that was the weakest black fighter out of the three.
As soon as he defeated Danny Jacobs, yes. All of a sudden, he's a weak black fighter.
He had 2 undefeated.
Now, you can argue overall that he's weaker all in all than Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But Dante, he had no problem with that fight happening previously. Then all of a sudden, the difference between these fans that he's talking about and Dante is that no one is saying overall that, this Pitbull Cruz guy would beat Gervonta Tank Davis. No one is saying that. But the thing is that Dante, he's perfectly fine with Danny Jacobs versus Canelo Alvarez until it actually happens, and then Canelo beats him, and then he says, oh, well, you know what, that wasn't that great. It is what it is.
Black fighters in Andrade and Jamal Charlo, which we already knew that would have been a huge win if he could have beat one of those guys. The guys that have been chasing him for 6 years. But as I predicted before he fought Danny Jacobs, of course he's going to fight the one black guy who's already been knocked out before and has 2 losses on his record, right?
Okay, so then Terrence Crawford, he doesn't deserve any credit over Sean Porter because Sean Porter already has a few losses in his career, right? Is that how that works, or do we have to take a look at things in context, Dante?
But then after that was years ago, that fight. And then he went back to fighting nothing but white/European fighters. There's no way you could sit over here and say that you're fighting better competition than Gervonta when he's fighting your own countrymen.
He's fighting overall champions. Canelo. Gervonta is not even facing real champions.
And dominating and knocking them out. Canelo's supposed to be doing the same thing on the opposite end of the spectrum. With all these Mexican greats that have lost to black fighters, Canelo is supposed to be going after the best black fighters available. He's supposed to be going after the best fighters, period, regardless if they're black or not black. If that means going up to 175 for real challenges, if you're going to fight against nothing but white fighters, why don't you at least fight the best white fighters?
He has been.
Bivol, Beterbiev, Those are real fights right there.
So answer me this question, Dante. Why did you think Billy Joe Saunders versus Demetrius Andrade was a great fight, but you think Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders is a horrible fight?
That being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I got a lot more to talk about when it comes to Canelo Alvarez. My next video, I'm about to talk about, of course, old media calling this man the greatest and et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go deep into that and shut all that down. So it's going to be a whole lot more crying from you Canelo Alvarez fans. That's for damn sure. That's all I got for now, guys. On to the next one.
Anyways, looks like that's finally it for the video. I'm glad we were able to get all of it in. I apologize for such a long video, but I believe that this video was very, very important to review. Anyways, that's really all I got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.